Before we begin with this one, I just want to give a really big shout out to EGC. The Genesis tournament was a godsend. You want to know why, folks? Because the players, the ones that were in the playoffs, they had to unprivate their profiles. They had to make sure that their data wasn't hidden anymore, which is why we get to bring you Viper in the black, playing as Abyss's Dynasty in the blue. And meanwhile, his opponent, which is he yellow? Is he red? Well, on our screens, he's red, but he is HRE. It's going to be Daut. So we got a high-level game ahead of us, folks. One that we wouldn't have been able to access if it wasn't for that tournament, requiring people to just switch the switch and make the data actually public again. So glad we're going to get these just before the patch drops, as well as it is Monday at the time of recording, and obviously the upcoming patch is going to invalidate previous patches replays, so there's going to be a cutoff point later today where we have to gather new footage. But let's talk about the game instead of talking about what's happening with the patches and the tournaments, because the Viper, of course, just what a champ right now after his performance in EGC. I think this took place just before, it took place on Saturday between him and Daut. But I'm interested because this matchup, we talked about how HRE can be pretty lethal in these choke point type maps, right? Like, they're not going to be top tier. They're not your France. Got it. Granted. They're not your Mongols. But what they are is they are competitively viable situationally. And what I mean by that is when you talk about these maps, like when you start on the hills or when you start with these choke points. And remember, this is one of those type of maps. Look, you got the choke points here and here. And these are the cross points, right? So if you as an HRE player can lock that down, then you actually stand quite a good chance. The other thing that could be pretty interesting in this matchup is Abyss's Dynasty aren't infamous for their rushes in 1v1s. They are actually capable of it, especially in larger games. In fact, if anyone has played enough 4v4s, you probably ran into the Abyss Dynasty spam where they just build battering rams in feudal as quickly as possible and then rush you in your own base. It's disgusting. But I'm not expecting that in 1v1s. In 1v1s, I expect something a little bit more static. Already, we're going to see the move out from Viper towards the center docking area for this huge surplus of fish. But look on the other side. This is problematic. Viper, he's going to lose this Villi. The scout has more health than he does, so he just turns around and begins to build this. I don't know if you can do this quick enough, though. Maybe if you've done it instantly, there's like a small chance. But instead, he just does the spike clubbing. He's like, fine, you want to screw me over? These sheep, they aren't coming home with you, okay? This ain't some sort of switch off from the famous Babe Pig movie where sheep's featured instead. This is a slaughterhouse. And he will eventually lose this poor little Villi. But this is the greed, right? Viper tried to do this on both sides. He shouldn't have much in the way of complaints because, in fairness, he did at least get down one side. And I love that move from Viper, sacrificing his early eco-gathering from his scouts to just make sure that he essentially guarantees one of these docks goes up. Meanwhile, Daut went for the safe option, right? He went for the back dock spawn, which is already going to be matched soon by Viper. You can see he's planning to build a dock here as well. So right now, Viper has access to these two different food sources. We've seen this map before, and we've seen the effect this can have. Really important that Daut gets someone out to start building on the water soon. And that's why he brings this villager out. The problem is this villager is not trading well. And what is going on here with this scout? There's like a tiny path here. The sheep, the scout, everyone's just getting trapped. This Villi should get sniped down eventually by the scout chase. But the problem here is he's going to lose another villager here without completing the dock. As I said, not the biggest deal for him. Definitely a bigger deal for Daut, just not being able to get on that water, that food supply in the center water basin. And this means Daut's going to probably, if he does get, I don't even know if he will be able to get there now, actually. I was about to say he'd be delayed. He'd have to basically get a military unit to guard as he goes out. Now, the reason I think that maybe doesn't even happen is you're going to delay that maneuver until Tech 2, right? At Tech 2, your opponent's going to have access to the Daut archer ships. And if he just plants one of them on each end, you can't get on this center basin. I really think that there's some kind of bought feelings, which are quite appropriate and fair towards the balance of water units right now. I think even in these type of maps, like, water kind of feels OP, right? Because if you can't get on there and your opponent does, it almost feels like a GG. I'm not going to say it's outright GG, but it's such a huge disadvantage that it's incredibly crippling. Like, you go from a 50-50 to like an 80-20. The reason being is, remember, we talk about time and time again, your resource gathering units get generated out of one building to start. Every time you build a dock, you're diversifying that. You're allowing another building that can get you food, and thus your resource gatherers from your primary, from your town center, can just focus on the combination of building, gold, wood, and stone, right? So that's one less critical resource, which is a very important one towards production and teching up, that you won't have to rely on villagers for. And that's the big deal, right? Like, you have to think, when you switch mentality and think about it that way, right now, Viper has his TC, and then he has 3 mini TCs, right? That's kind of how you have to imagine this. Meanwhile, his opponent has 1 mini TC and a main TC. In fairness to him, remember HRE, like, they can boom tall much more potently, especially with this Achen Chapel being built. We talk about this time and time again, how amazing this structure is, and how unique, in my opinion, compared to a lot of the factions the HRE's opening is, because I will rarely ever see HRE players rush towards a second TC boom. There is validity in it, but because of this gathering rate bonus, it's not like a do or die must. It's more like if you're doing this Achen Chapel, your opponent needs to do a second TC, maybe even a third TC. Because this 40% gather rate boost in this initial area, it booms your early eco vastly beyond anything I feel like any other faction can do at the beginning of Feudal Age. Now, keep in mind, it does pivot back, obviously. Like, although you can make more prelates, keep in mind that this Achen Chapel's area is somewhat contained, so once you get through this initial gold source, once you get through this tree line here, like, you're gonna have to bring out more prelates if you want to keep up that juicy gathering rate, but it pays for itself, man. We talked about it before, right? Like, a single prelate, although it costs 100 gold, which can be somewhat pricey, it will buff constantly 10 villages, which, especially if you think about late game situations, is actually a lot more efficient than the alternatives, right? Because with a 40% increase, like, you're saving yourself a few workers, right? But it's only taking up 1 pop cap. And when you get into late game, like, eco-wise, if you can have the same economy as someone with 110 villages, but you're doing it with, like, 90 or less, because you have prelates in there as well, you'll take that every day of the week. That's extra military surplus to throw into a fight. So Rack's finally going down after the tech up. Remember, Viper didn't complete his tech up yet. Because it's House of Wisdom, it doesn't require workers to be committed, but it does have a fixed amount of time that you can't bypass, which of course those 2 minutes. But he's there now. And he's already in the water, remember? We talked about this. So I wouldn't be surprised if he adds 1 or 2 Daut ships. But look at this move, actually. Outpost already going down, but I don't think this is good enough from Daut. He's going to try and use this to protect his build-up, but I feel like if there had been an immediate archer ship constructed by Viper, this wouldn't happen. Really smart move out of Daut, but surprised Viper hasn't countered it yet. Looks like he's not even going to bother. He's starting to build an archer ship, but he's going to realize it's too late. So he does cancel out in the end. He also does get some scouting info. He sees that there's already early man-at-arms coming out. Remember, this is one of the advantages that you can get as the HRE. One that I don't often see HRE players utilize, actually, surprisingly enough. They'll get them later, but usually not in Feudal. Usually they wait until Castle when they get their normie man-at-arms, as I like to call them. And what? This move from Viper, this slivery boy, he actually came all the way up to the corner and built a dock on Daut's fish supply, right? The problem is that Daut was quick on this. He already expected maybe this threat was going to come to his main food source, so he did build a galley early to protect this. Really smart play coming out from Daut. Meanwhile, on the main source here, the base in the center, you can already see a Daut ship now coming out. There are galleys being built. Now, remember, galleys do have an edge against the archer ships. They have more range, and they have more health as well as slightly more damage. So he can win out in a fight, except for the problem he has right now is he wouldn't have anything but the dock to repair. So really, it's kind of wonky if you can't get fishing ships as well. It's also wonky if Viper starts to build up a small fleet on the center mass here, which he might do. And once again, Daut's doing it again. He's building another outpost. The archer ship was quick across, so it will deter them from completing. But I just love this counter-aggression from Daut. Like, we said how important this center basin is going to be, and he understands that, respects that, and finds a pivot strategy to get himself on the water. And he's already starting to build these galleys. These galleys, which in bulks of one, shouldn't be good enough to take down these fishing ships, but if you had a second one in there, you could probably start to burst through these fishing ships and just burn a lot of Viper's economy. Meanwhile, forward move with another outpost. Dude, I love Daut's prioritization around outposts. Not just around the center basin, but just vision across the board. He wants to know what Viper is doing, where he's doing it, and when he's doing it, right? So he can identify very quickly whether his opponent's going to boom or not. And that should make it obvious. This is how quick Viper was, right? We didn't even get a chance to talk about the fact he'd already begun to tech up. So he actually went for Eco and Culture Wings. So he is pretty heavy into the economy booming, which should be obvious by the fact he's already tech-free pre-10 minutes as the Abbasid dynasty, right? But this is the power of going on the water, right? This is what water enables. These type of timings that just aren't feasible without the presence of fishing boats. The question is whether he's going to get to keep having his cake and eating it, because it looks like Daut has finally had enough. He's got double galley on the center basin, so this will start to get a little bit frustrating for Viper. Yeah, and he's just choking out both. He wants to make sure that there's no chance to build up a new archer ship fleet on the other side of the basin. Really smart move out of him. And this archer ship is going to lose soon. And it looks like he's oh, wow. Daut. The outpost crawl is impressive. He actually managed to sneak one in right on the gold vein. He will be repelled a little bit back by the crossbowman, but, I mean, the outpost is down. The damage is done. He's already researching the arrow slits. And the other damning part for Viper at this point in the game is he's already shown his hand by going crossbows, right? So look, he's relying on villagers to try and burn this down quick enough. Now, in fairness, these villagers do a lot of damage. It's 10 damage. I wouldn't be surprised if that's someone we see fixed or adjusted in the future, by the way, if these numbers get changed so that it's not everyone goes to 10 damage at least. Like, we've seen this for scout rushing, right, where they do 10 burn damage each. That being said, as we're talking about that, the crossbowmen do manage to snipe out the villies, so no more outpost shenanigans for the moment. But arrow slits has not been researched yet. No, that was just the villager sneaking in, so we'll send 2 men at arms. But arrow slit was committed onto this outpost, which means the crossbowmen are just dying. And now the villies, oof, they're going to get cleaned up as well, I think. Yeah, so that's another crossbowman going down. You can just garrison now. It should be somewhat guarded. Let's return to what's happening in the center basin, though, because it looks like... yeah, Viper's just given up. Or has he? He built a Bagler. The problem is in a 2-on-1, the Bagler should win still, right? I mean, it's the Hulk, right? And if you bring the fishing ships out like this is kind of the rough part. Is like this Bagler will just spray you down pretty consistently. I think he needs a 3rd galley. I might be wrong, though. I think with the assistance of the outpost, he might actually have this. Yeah. All right. I shouldn't underestimate Daut. Yeah, so he's not even going to lose the galley for this. Big investment, once again lost by Viper. It did buy time for him to get his fisher ships back out to gather some more food here. But it starts to feel like Viper's existence on the center basin is on the clock, right? There's a finite amount of time he's got. He did at least force a 2nd galley commit up here, but Daut just great anticipation so far. Reading his opponent and adapting and adjusting really well. There's plenty of players who would have just fallen back, bulked up, and tried to go for like a later timing when they saw they missed out on the center basin. But Daut understands the importance of this resource, right? Of this ginormous clump of resources. We've talked about it before, right? It's like 30,000 food on average for most games, sitting in that pond. You can't ignore it. You can't let your opponent just have it for free. And not only did he manage to repel him in the center, but he also applied pressure in the primary base, which forced this heavy commitment early in the defensive from Viper. And you know what the rough part is? Yeah, I just looked around. This is the even rougher part. Viper hasn't been gathering gold. Notice this number is barely moving. Because he had to run people all the way over here to set up a new gold line. So he did get there in the end, but obviously this would have been his prioritization, which is why it was such a smart move out of Daut. It was pretty greedy of him to try and start gathering food right next to Daut's base. Viper's base, though, rather. So Baron Ram will be able to take down these outposts. But that's sport time, right? Like, heavy damage being done here. The boom ship! The boom ship! I don't think it's going to be good enough, though. It shouldn't one-hit kill them. Oh, no! It's going to be just shy of one-hit killing. Oh, that is rough. That is so rough. If we were talking normal archer ships, yeah, you'd have them, right? But the 50 extra health to keep the galleys up. He's trying to build a new one, but this should die quick enough as long as he commits the Hulk here. So you will not get this explosive ship out in time. What you will be able to do on the other side, though, is push further forward with this battering ram to try and protect the northern dock. The problem is, when he comes on sea, you know, Daut is going to have the advantage here towards the north. So really, it's just Viper trying to get the best value he can out of the battering ram and just kind of make up the difference and you know, get as much value out of these fishing ships before his fun on the water comes to an end. Wait, did he? Oh, the explosive. So he didn't realize it was still being produced. He left it to burn down. The explosive ship was trying to just trade out the dock, not able to do so. So now he's only got the northern dock to work with. And there isn't even enough time to actually get a new explosive ship out. So this is going to be Daut taking control of the center basin. And this means he can start producing into some fish gatherers, right? He can actually start to fish on this place. I mean, the fleet's already been burned in the north. Did he delete them manually? Maybe. Feels like it. Meanwhile, already into night. So Daut didn't have to really commit too heavily early on. We saw the early man-at-arms, but that's just for the tankiness so they can protect outposts. Now he's trying to prioritize into the night. This is an interesting choice considering he already saw the crossbowmen revealed. Remember, crossbowmen do counter out knights quite well, so you just give a kind of flimsy front line and then the crossbowmen just munch straight through your knights. That being said, HRE does have this problem, right? They tend to be in a bit of a pickle when you think about it, because what are you going to build into when you're HRE? What are you trying to do, right? You've got all this gold trickling in. You want to try and find value there. You're always thinking about these armored units, right? Whether it's the man-at-arms or the knight. So kind of a wonky balance point. Outside the early Lancer play, or the Horseman play, rather, that we're seeing a little bit of here, that's usually the pivot we see these HRE players make. And of course, Crossbowman does just counter that out. So I feel like this is going to be a pattern. The longer we see people playing up against HRE, the more frequently we're going to see the Crossbowman being utilized as a counter directly. Because it does counter a lot of what you want to do, what seems optimal to do as an HRE player. And I think these Crossbowmen, they might be done, but they're going to take a few with them. They're going to make them work for it. Yeah. So as you can see, Horsemen just really don't care. They don't take any bonus damage. It's always something to keep in mind is the hidden extra values, right? Because, of course, I think there's a visual that kind of supports this where you can see plus, like minus, damage to certain unit types. So, like, for example, if you're using camel archers, you get an extra 20 damage on your shots against spearmen, right? But these crossbowmen, the bonus damage they get against these knights doesn't exist against horsemen. So horsemen just a cheap solution. It'd be kind of interesting to see if Daut just kind of like doubles down on a super mobile fighting force, right? Like a combo of knights and horsemen. I would love to see that. But Lancers have been revealed by Viper, so he knows he needs to get some eco damage done because there has to be a booming HRE player here. And he'd be right? We didn't even talk about this second TC that went down. Of course, he's got the Regnitz Cathedral. In terms of relic count, he hasn't been able to secure these ones in the center. So just holding this choke point would be huge for Viper. We completely stopped out from getting maximum value out of the Regnitz Cathedral, which gives 200% extra gold per minute from these relics. And there's the TC expansion as well. So Viper making sure this gold vein is secure this time. Not much left to it. But more importantly, he can start to try and eco boom. Because he has to have scouted out that second TC and realized that he was maybe possibly behind. But shouldn't be that worried. When you look at the count, Viper is still very much ahead on the eco. And he's already harassing out as well. So forcing these flimsy infantry to try and chase down the Lancers isn't going to be very successful. And Viper, even if he just loses 1 or 2 Lancers here, the amount of villages he stopped producing, or stopped from working, rather, in Daut's lines here is totally worth it. Speaking of villages, good lordy. Hey, man, when you're up against HRE, you gotta make sure you're in charge of the gold, right? Because you know these HREs, pesky HRE players, are usually munching up the resources quick with their gathering rates, but then also usually, I feel like you always see the Cathedral. I don't think I've once in a high-level game seen someone go for the Palace, right? The one that produces 5 units at a time. It seems like a cool idea, but then you just go, I can just build 5 racks and get the same effect, right? Whereas this gold generation, this unlimited gold generation, how do you compete with that? How can you ever argue for the Palace over getting unlimited gold? It's impossible, right? So stone mining expansion is going to be sniped out here. There is no walling going on at all. I was kind of surprised we didn't eventually see a wall off of these choke points to just try and control the ebb and flow and get early info on an army moving in. But in the meantime, horsemen are being sniped out by the Lancers. Baits him in though, almost gets one. Nice attempt there by Daut. Let's go try and chase them down. But look at the harassment that's still in. Viper is doing so much work here. And meanwhile, his economy is just booming. Unfriend. He built a 3rd TC down here, and this is what we were expecting to see, right? Abbasid Dynasty are all about TC booming. It's such a potent, absolutely ridiculous. I'd say it's like, I want to say top 2 for TC booming. This faction is top 2 for TC booming, I think. I don't think there are many that contest their ability to eco boom. Usually, so here's the thought. Usually there are factions that seem stronger when they're TC booming because of the early presence, right? Whereas for Abbasid Dynasty, I do think it's about a slightly later timing when you start to get access to your camels and you start to build a composite army, right? And that's maybe where Abyss's weakness can sometimes be, is they need to get that composite army first, because there's these kind of cross-pollinations, right? Things like the armor buff for infantry when camels are nearby is actually a really big deal. So I think that's why usually when we watch Abbasid Dynasty against, these very rushy type factions, when we're talking like Mongols and France, they don't look as powerful as they should be on the TC boom timings because of the amount they're being forced to invest into military early and because of the harassment that's being done to the lines. But when you start to get off the ground like this, when you have the beginning that Viper had, where the pressure was not there from Daut, just look at the difference it makes, because the Camel Archer army is amassing, and he's building forward racks here to make sure there's a military front line to support these camels. Meanwhile, Daut, look at all this exposed economy. And his army is a baby army right now. It's not an army, it's a patrol force. I mean, he's got 11 man-arms, 12, 13 man-arms in base. There's more Camel Archers than that coming in right now. And they're already sniping into the eco. And there is so much eco here from Daut. Get the prelate, get the prelate. The prelate's the big one if he gets him. But he doesn't manage to. I feel like this is a detail you should always look out for, by the way, when you're trying to snipe HRE economy. Always snipe the prelate. Always. Especially if you're talking about early aggression, right? 100 gold in the early mid-game is such a big deal. Not to mention, even at this stage of the game, right? This guy is increasing 10 people's work output by 40%. Would you not like to get rid of that? That's better than getting rid of, like, 3 of these workers. So man-arms, they find a choke point. They will get through some lances, but the Camel Archers are still in and still causing frustration. And when we look at the eco side of things, it's going to look pretty rough, right? Viper's about to crack 100 with his eco units. Meanwhile, 71 for Daut. Remember, he only went 2 TCs. We talked about this. When you're playing HRE, you build tall. Oh, sorry, 3 TCs now. But when you play HRE, you build tall, you don't build wide, right? Because that's the thing I was going to highlight here. Is like, although we've got 3 TCs, look at the location of these TCs, right? You got 2 close here, but then look at this one really far out here, right? It's the fact that you expand further because HRE, yes, we saw him try to go for the Knights, but now see what he's doing. He's always falling back to these man-arms, these spearmen. It causes you to be in a situation where you have a very static force that's very reactionary, which is why I think Daut's big mistake in this game was not controlling those choke points. I think he needed to wall them, if anything. Even if it just delays a little bit, it gives you prior info to know where an attack is coming. And because there was never an attempt to even try and wall up this choke point, which I think was very doable, or maybe even just wall over here, now you're in the situation where Viper's always in your base and he's probably never leaving. And another Camel Archer army! Oh, no! And he's got no one watching. This horseman's probably going to spot it, but might be too little too late. By the time that Camel Archer army arrives, like, what have you really built up to defend yourself still? This is the concerning part for me for Daut. Maybe if he played into, let's say, I think possibly he could have played into building into some siege weapons, maybe. Getting a few springles up. It is pricey, right? But you need some sort of long-range engagement. You can't be forced to do what you're doing right now, where it's just like, I'm gonna get you. Chases, I'm gonna get you. You can never get them. The only reason you ever catch Viper is because he wants you to catch him. Yeah, and we're just seeing him start to burn these boys down. Now the elite man-at-arms, because remember, he did go up to Impage. The power of booming when you're Abbasid Dynasty. And this is the power just like on show from taking control of that center basin. Again, it really comes back to that, because remember, they're both playing factions that have eco-booming potential, tech-booming potential. But you can really see the day and night difference when Daut, he hasn't even got the resources to begin constructing up to Tech 4. Meanwhile, Viper's already been sitting there for a minute. Now, these elite Camel Archers, they can trade well with pretty much anything. The veteran Archers aren't going to be good enough. This pivot over feels like it might be a little bit too late. And even if you're doing this right now, there's a forward builder force, right? Yeah. So these guys can immediately just pivot into making a siege workshop if they want. I mean, you don't even need to, remember, because we're talking Abbasid Dynasty. So if anything, these man-at-arms could turn around, build a Mangonel, and they'll just mince this archer force in the blink of an eye. Baron rams in. Daut. He's having to use the villagers. This is the worst case scenario. He doesn't have a melee army to push for because it means he's sniped out by the Camel Archers. Those Camel Archers, by the way, on the north side haven't even engaged yet. They've just been sitting here, courtesy of the keep being up now. They're moving in, and they're wrapping around, so the Archer's going to have to fall completely back, and they're just flooding on through. Emergency repairs will at least keep the outpost up and healthy, but this archer army is going to keep running back. But the more you run back, the more of your economy you expose, right? And the less your economy is working is you have to keep garrisoning them in. And now as they move in, that just creates space for the battering rams to start working through the previous buildings. They can easily start to build more siege weapons if they want to, but with this new Camel Archer force in, I think we're done here. Daut just doesn't have the military presence. He gets the tech up, but unless there was some sort of bet, some wager here where Viper says if you reach Impage, I'll tech out, I'll GG out, then this game is going to be over in favor of Viper because there's just not enough forces left here. And the treacle continues on in. New forces always being built. And Daut, any new forces that come out are just instantly wiped out for him. And he's even going straight for the gold. He's like, no. Before you think crossbows, before you think man-arms, anything like that, let's just get rid of your cathedral, because we know that HRE is a religious civilization. So burning their cathedral will burn their morale and burn them out of this game.